"You saved me," she whispered, trembling. But her eyes froze when the hoofbeats echoed from the hills. The hunter's fingers tightened around his bow, heart pounding. From the mist came riders with painted faces and blades drawn. Her brothers, sworn to take his head for a crime he didn't commit. He'd risked his life to save her from the coyotes, but now the real predators were here. Welcome to MS Incredible Stories. Let's uncover what really happened. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the endless stretch of prairie grass. A lone figure moved steadily through the tall blades, his footsteps quiet but purposeful. The young hunter was known by few, but the land whispered his name in the rustling of the wind. His dark eyes scanned the terrain, alert to every movement, every sound that might betray the presence of game or danger. The worn leather of his boots bore the dust of many miles traveled alone, and the bow slung across his back was his trusted companion. The prairie was both his sanctuary and his challenge, a vast, untamed expanse where survival demanded patience, skill, and respect. He knew the rhythms of this land, the secret trails animals left, the scent of water in dry soil. Each day, he ventured farther, chasing shadows and dreams, hunting for sustenance and something more, a purpose beyond mere survival. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it an unfamiliar scent, one of smoke, earth, and something wilder. He paused, nostrils flaring, senses sharpening. The soft crunch of footsteps, not his own, reached his ears, faint but distinct. He crouched low behind a cluster of sagebrush, heart steady but ready. Ahead, a flicker of movement caught the fading light. A figure stumbling, faltering, vulnerable. His pulse quickened. The night was drawing close, and danger in these parts was never far behind. He moved swiftly, weaving through the grass toward the sound of distress. As he neared, the telltale growls of starving coyotes cut through the quiet. Their eyes glinted, fixed on the trembling shape barely visible among the shadows. Without hesitation, the hunter raised his bow, the familiar weight steady in his hands. His voice broke the silence, firm, commanding, scattering the pack. The woman, barely more than a shadow in the dusk, looked up with wide, frightened eyes. She was alone, lost, and on the edge of something far darker than the night. The hunter stepped forward, his voice gentle but resolute. "You're safe now." The prairie held its breath, the wind hushed, and a story that would soon ripple beyond these endless fields began to unfold. The twilight deepened, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange as the sun slipped below the horizon. The hunter stood near the edge of a small creek, the woman leaning weakly against a weathered tree. Her breath came shallow, and the faint tremor in her hands betrayed exhaustion and fear. Despite the quiet, the land seemed restless. Shadows lengthened, and unseen creatures stirred in the gathering dark. A sudden, piercing cry echoed across the prairie, sharp and urgent. The hunter's eyes snapped toward the sound, muscles tensing. It was a call, wild, desperate, carried on the wind, coming from the distant hills to the east. The woman stiffened beside him, her eyes flickering with recognition and dread. She whispered a name in a language unfamiliar to him, but the tone was clear, warning. He knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "Who are they? What's coming?" She hesitated, gaze dropping to the ground before meeting his eyes again. "My brothers," she said softly. "They search for me. They will not stop until they find me. They think I've broken the law of our people." The hunter's jaw tightened. The prairie had room for many secrets, but none so dangerous as the wrath of a tribe. He looked toward the hills, where the last light flickered. The cry had come again, closer this time, accompanied by the distant thunder of hooves against hard earth. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small knife, the blade gleaming faintly in the dusk. "They want to punish you," he said quietly. "We need to move." The woman nodded, though the fear in her eyes remained. Her story was tangled in shadows he could not yet see, but her trust in him was a fragile flame he vowed to protect. Together, they slipped into the deepening dark, footsteps muffled by thick grass. Above them, The first stars began to blink awake, silent witnesses to a night that promised danger and a chance for something new. The hunter's grip tightened on his bow. Somewhere in the distance, the cry rose again, a haunting thread weaving through the twilight. The night wrapped the prairie in a thick, cold blanket, the moon a sliver barely lighting the way. The hunter and the Kiowa woman moved cautiously through the brush, their breaths visible in the frosty air. Suddenly, a low growl cut through the stillness, sharp and chilling. The woman froze, eyes wide with terror, as several pairs of glowing eyes appeared from the shadows, circling like ghosts in the dark. Starving coyotes, gaunt and desperate, pressed closer with hungry snarls. Their ribs showed beneath matted fur, and their ragged breaths hissed in the silence. The woman's grip tightened on the hunter's arm, her body trembling with fear. He raised his bow slowly, scanning the encroaching pack. There was no time for hesitation. The animals pressed forward, their hunger driving them reckless. With calm precision born of many hunts, the hunter notched an arrow, drawing the string taut. His eyes never left the nearest coyote, muscles coiled like a spring. The sharp twang of the bowstring broke the night as the arrow flew, striking true. One beast yelped and retreated, but the pack pressed on, emboldened by hunger. The woman whispered a prayer in her native tongue, barely audible over the snarls. The hunter's heart pounded as he shifted his stance, preparing another shot. Around them, the circling coyotes closed the ring, their teeth bared, eyes burning with wild desperation. The hunter could feel the weight of the moment, the thin line between life and death. Then, from the edge of the clearing, a sudden howl pierced the air, long, mournful, and commanding. The coyotes faltered, heads turning toward the sound. More howls echoed back, and the pack hesitated, confusion rippling through them. The hunter saw movement in the shadows, the approach of a larger, more dominant wolf, asserting control. One by one, the starving coyotes backed away, slipping silently into the darkness. The woman exhaled sharply, relief flooding her features. The hunter lowered his bow, eyes still scanning the shadows. He stepped closer to her, voice steady but gentle. "You're safe now. For tonight." The prairie held its breath once more. The danger passed, but the true threat was still waiting just beyond the horizon. Dawn broke softly over the prairie, pale light filtering through the tall grasses and casting a gentle glow on the earth. The hunter moved quietly, leading the Kiowa woman toward a small copse of trees where shelter might be found. Her steps were tentative but steady, a fragile hope growing with every careful pace. The night's terror still clung to her, the memories of hungry eyes, the sharp growls ringing in her ears. Yet, in the hunter's calm presence, a new strength began to stir. He had risked everything to pull her from the jaws of death, standing between her and the starving pack with nothing but his skill and quiet courage. As they neared the trees, he paused and looked down at her, his voice low but certain. "You're safe now. I won't let anything harm you." The woman's eyes met his, the fear slowly giving way to gratitude. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper in the morning air. "Thank you." He fashioned a small fire with practiced hands, the crackle and smoke a balm against the cold and the long night behind them. The woman sat close, wrapped in a threadbare blanket he'd carried for just such a moment. Her hands trembled as she warmed them by the flames, the shadows of the night beginning to fade with the light. Though he had saved her from immediate danger, the hunter knew this was only the beginning. The world outside held threats far more complex: family ties, ancient laws, and the weight of a tribe's judgment. Yet in this quiet moment, beneath the awakening sky, the bond between them took root. He shared what little food he had, breaking bread between them without words. The silence was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that both were survivors of battles no one else could see. In the eyes of the Kiowa woman, he saw a flicker of something fierce, defiance, resilience, a will to live on her own terms. As the sun climbed higher, casting gold across the prairie, the hunter made a silent vow. He would stand with her against whatever storm was coming, no matter the cost. The rescue had been courageous, but the journey ahead would demand even more. The morning sun warmed the clearing where they rested, but the Kiowa woman remained quiet, her eyes distant as if tracing memories far beyond the prairie's edge. She sat wrapped in the rough blanket the hunter had offered, hands folded tightly in her lap. Words were scarce between them. Neither forced speech nor sought answers. But in the weight of her silence, gratitude spoke louder than any language. The hunter watched her carefully, noting the subtle shifts, the way her eyes softened when they met his, the faint nod she gave when he passed her water. It was a quiet conversation, a delicate exchange born from shared hardship. She was a woman accustomed to speaking only when necessary, her strength forged in silence and survival. At one point, she reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against the hunter's hand. The touch was brief, but meaningful, an unspoken thank you that carried more weight than 1,000 words. The hunter squeezed her hand gently, offering reassurance that needed no translation. Though they came from worlds apart, the moment bridged the distance. He understood that in saving her life, he had also become part of a story far older than either of them. A story written in trust, respect, and the courage to protect another soul. The woman's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where dark clouds gathered, hinting at storms yet to come. She did not speak of the dangers that awaited or the brothers who would soon demand answers. Instead, she let the quiet between them grow, filling it with the resilience that had carried her through so many trials. For the hunter, the silent thanks was enough. It was a promise that she would not forget the night he had stood against the shadows to bring her back from the brink. And for her, it was a fragile hope, a belief that even in a world ruled by unspoken laws and fierce loyalty, kindness could find its place. As they prepared to move, the woman finally gave a small, steady nod. No words, just the clear message that she trusted him. For now, and perhaps for the journey still unfolding under the wide, watchful sky. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the prairie, the hunter led the Kiowa woman toward a weathered cabin nestled among a small cluster of trees. The structure was simple, rough-hewn logs, a sagging roof, but it promised warmth and safety, a fragile sanctuary against the creeping darkness. The hunter's eyes scanned the horizon one last time before they crossed the threshold. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and earth. A modest hearth stood cold but ready, and a stack of firewood waited patiently nearby. The hunter moved quickly, striking flint against steel to coax sparks to life. Flames flickered and grew, casting dancing light across the walls. The woman watched quietly, her gaze steady but weary. He found an old wool blanket and spread it on the wooden floor, gesturing for her to rest. She hesitated for a moment, then sank down with a sigh that seemed to carry months of exhaustion. The hunter removed his coat, draping it over a nearby chair, and sat opposite her, eyes alert but calm. The night crept in around the cabin, the wind whispering through cracks in the logs. Outside, the prairie was a vast sea of shadows, but here, the fire's warmth wrapped around them like a shield. The woman's fingers traced the edge of the blanket, her shoulders relaxing in the safety the hunter's presence offered. Though neither spoke much, a quiet understanding settled between them. The hunter knew that this shelter was more than just walls and fire. It was a promise that for this night, at least, she could breathe without fear. And for the woman, it was a rare gift, a place to gather strength, to face whatever storms might come with steady heart. As the fire crackled softly, the hunter's eyes flicked to the window, where stars began to pierce the dark canvas of sky. He thought of the journey ahead and the dangers waiting beyond the trees. But for now, in this fragile moment of peace, he was a guardian, and the night belonged to them both. The night deepened, the fire's glow flickering softly against the cabin walls as shadows danced in rhythm with the crackling flames. Outside, the prairie lay silent under a blanket of stars, the vastness both comforting and ominous. The hunter sat quietly, his gaze steady but distant, while the Kiowa woman rested on the worn blanket, eyes heavy but watchful. The air was thick with unspoken tension, as if the darkness itself carried whispers of what was to come. Neither dared to speak much. Words felt fragile, easily shattered by the weight of the unknown. Yet, in the stillness between them, a shared understanding grew, a silent bond forged by trust and the raw edge of survival. Hours passed slowly, measured only by the shifting glow of embers and the occasional sigh of wind brushing against the cabin. The woman's fingers twitched once, tracing invisible patterns in the air, as if drawing strength from some memory beyond reach. The hunter observed her, sensing the storm gathering not just in the sky, but in the shadows that stretched toward dawn. As the first hints of pale light crept through the cracks in the wooden walls, the world outside began to stir. A soft murmur of birdsong, the distant rustle of leaves. The hunter rose slowly, stretching muscles stiff from stillness, and glanced toward the window. The coming dawn promised both hope and reckoning. He reached out gently, touching the woman's shoulder, grounding them both in the fragile moment. Her eyes met his, steady, fierce, and unyielding despite the weariness beneath. No words were exchanged, but the message was clear. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Beyond the cabin, the prairie whispered its secrets to the awakening day, carrying warnings and promises on the breeze. The hunter and the Kiowa woman prepared silently, the weight of the coming dawn settling around them like a quiet storm. In that fragile light, courage found its breath, waiting to rise with the sun. The pale light of dawn stretched slowly across the prairie, casting long, cold shadows over the earth. The hunter stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes narrowing as shapes emerged from the morning mist. Dust rose softly beneath the steady beat of hooves. Figures mounted on horses, their faces stern and unyielding, moving with a purpose that brooked no delay. The Kiowa woman appeared beside him, her posture rigid yet unbowed. She scanned the riders with a quiet intensity, lips pressed tight as the horses drew nearer. These were her brothers, warriors bound by blood and tradition, and they carried the weight of ancient laws behind their measured approach. The hunters dismounted in silence, forming a tight circle around the cabin. Their faces were painted with the markings of kinship and warning, streaks of red and ochre that told of both honor and anger. Their eyes held no kindness. Their presence was a living judgment. The woman's gaze met her brother's with unwavering resolve, but the tension hung thick in the cold morning air. The hunter stepped forward cautiously, hands visible and calm, signaling no threat. Yet even his steady presence could not temper the hard lines etched into the faces before him. One of the brothers, tall and imposing, dismounted with deliberate grace. His eyes locked on the hunter, cold and accusing. Without words, the message was clear. The debt for the woman's absence was reckoned, and it was a debt paid with blood. The woman lifted her chin, voice steady but quiet as she spoke in her native tongue. Though the hunter did not understand the words, the meaning carried unmistakable weight. A plea, a declaration, and a challenge all at once. For a long moment, silence fell, broken only by the soft stamping of hooves and the whisper of wind through the grass. The hunter's heart beat steady, his gaze unwavering as the brothers measured him, the fragile threads of trust now tested in the harsh light of dawn. The stage was set. The coming hours would decide not only the woman's fate, but the hunter's own path through a world bound by honor, loyalty, and unforgiving law. The air grew heavy with unspoken accusations as the tallest of the brothers stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fierce resolve. His voice, low and steady, cut through the stillness like a sharpened blade. "You have taken what belongs to our family," he said, each word weighted with the weight of tradition and honor. "For this you must answer." The hunter met his gaze without flinching, hands open and calm but ready. He understood the demand. Not just for punishment, but for respect to be upheld, for order to be restored in a world ruled by ancient laws. The woman stood between them, her posture defiant yet weary, a silent testament to the storm she had weathered. The brothers' circle tightened, the mood shifting from tense to charged, the line between justice and vengeance thin and trembling. Their eyes flicked between the hunter and their sister, seeking a resolution that honored both blood and courage. The land around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the verdict that would tip the balance. The tallest brother's voice rose again, a challenge. "You claim no wrong, but you have crossed the line. The law demands you pay." His words echoed in the cold morning air, carrying the weight of generations who had upheld the same code. The hunter's jaw clenched. He had come prepared, not just to fight, but to understand, to prove that the bond between them could be something beyond conflict. The woman's eyes searched his, silent but pleading. She spoke softly, her words a fragile bridge between worlds. "He saved my life," she said, voice steady despite the tension. "Not as a thief, but as a protector. The path I chose is mine." The brothers exchanged looks, uncertainty flickering in their eyes for the first time. The demand for justice remained, but so did a seed of doubt, a question of what justice truly meant in a world shaped by survival, honor, and the courage to defy expectations. The hunter stood firm, ready to face whatever came next. The morning light sharpened around them, illuminating a crossroads where the fate of all hung delicately in balance. The hunter's gaze remained steady, unyielding beneath the sharp scrutiny of the brothers. Their eyes burned with suspicion and challenge, but his calm presence carved a quiet space amid the rising tension. He lowered his hands slowly, a deliberate gesture of peace, though every muscle was poised for whatever might come next. "I do not seek to steal or to claim," he said, his voice clear and measured. "I only saved a life, a woman who would have perished without help." His words carried weight, not from defiance, but from the certainty of truth and respect. The prairie wind stirred, carrying the echoes of old laws and new promises tangled in the air. The tallest brother stepped closer, anger flickering in his eyes. "Your words do not erase what you have done. You have broken our laws. Justice demands a reckoning." But the hunter did not flinch. Instead, he met the man's challenge with steady resolve. "Then let that reckoning be fair," the hunter said quietly. "Not a blind vengeance, but a test. I will prove my honor, my strength, and my intentions. If I fail, I will accept whatever fate your laws decree. But if I succeed, then let her choice stand." The woman watched him closely, a flicker of hope softening her gaze. The brothers exchanged glances, the harsh lines of their faces momentarily softened by consideration. The tension between tradition and mercy wove a fragile thread that stretched taut across the clearing. One brother nodded slowly, the silent agreement passing like a breath among them. "A test," he said, "one that will decide more than words ever could." The hunter's shoulders relaxed just slightly, but his eyes remained sharp, alert. He understood the stakes, not just for himself, but for the woman who had entrusted her life to his care. The moment demanded more than courage. It demanded honor tempered by calm resolve. As the prairie held its breath, the hunter stood ready, poised at the edge of judgment, knowing that the coming hours would shape their fates forever. The morning sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on faces drawn tight with emotion. Words flew between the hunter and the brothers, sharp, swift, and unrelenting, each syllable carrying the weight of history and hurt. Their voices rose and fell like the wind through the grass, striking with the precision of arrows aimed to wound or defend. "You come from outside our people," one brother said, eyes flashing with distrust. "You do not understand our ways, our laws. You threaten the balance we have kept for generations." His tone was cold, accusatory, a blade slicing through any fragile trust. The hunter met him with quiet strength. "I do not seek to threaten. I only acted to save a life, without thought of ownership or claim." But the words seemed to stir only deeper suspicion. Another brother stepped forward, voice low and fierce. "She is our sister. To take her, to shelter her without our consent, is to dishonor our family." His gaze pierced the hunter like a spear. How can you prove you are worthy of her trust? The woman's eyes flicked between them, pain and defiance mingling in their depths. She raised her voice for the first time, steady but resolute. I am no longer a child to be claimed. I chose to live, to survive in the way I believe is right. You do not own me. Her words hung heavy in the air, met with silence and the weight of hard truths. The brothers' faces shifted, some tight with anger, others conflicted, wrestling with the balance between tradition and the woman's fierce independence. The hunter's voice broke through the tension, calm but firm. Let my actions speak where words fail. Let the test show my honor. His gaze held theirs, steady as the prairie sky. The brothers nodded reluctantly, the sharp edges of accusation dulling to cautious respect. Words had cut deep, but they had also laid bare the truths they could no longer ignore. The path ahead would demand more than words. It would demand courage, trust, and the willingness to face what the heart truly sought. As the tension settled like dust after a storm, the Kiowa woman stepped forward, her voice low but clear, carrying a weight that silenced even the sharpest accusations. She spoke in her native tongue, words rolling like distant thunder across the prairie, their meaning deep and hidden to the hunter but understood by her brothers. The brothers listened, faces folding with surprise, anger, and then something softer, concern. The woman's secret, long guarded beneath layers of fear and pain, was finally laid bare. She had fled not out of rebellion alone, but to escape a fate darker than mere punishment. She revealed the shadow that had haunted her steps, a threat from within their own tribe, a danger cloaked in silence and betrayal. The man she was meant to marry, chosen by custom but not by heart, held power back by cruelty. Her refusal was not just defiance, it was survival. The hunter's eyes widened as he grasped the truth unfolding before him. The woman's flight was not only from tradition, but from a looming peril that would consume her spirit if she stayed. Her brother's expressions shifted from wrath to confusion, then fierce protectiveness. One brother, his voice rough with disbelief and hurt, asked why she had hidden this truth. She looked at him with steady eyes. Because I feared losing you all. Because silence was the only shield I had left. The hunter reached out, a silent gesture of support, but it was the brothers who took a step forward, their anger tempered now by a fierce need to protect their kin. The fragile lines between law and love blurred, as the secret gave new meaning to the night's demands. In that moment, the woman's courage became a catalyst, not only exposing hidden wounds within her family, but opening a path toward understanding, honor, and the chance for a future shaped by choice, not fear. The prairie held its breath, the weight of the secret settling among them like a promise that some truths, once revealed, could change everything. The sun dipped low, pinning the prairie with soft hues of gold, and rose as the tension from earlier slowly eased. Around the fire, the hunter and the brothers sat in quiet contemplation, the woman nestled between worlds yet firmly grounded in her own resolve. The harsh lines of distrust softened just enough to reveal something unexpected, an unlikely bond beginning to take shape. The brothers exchanged cautious glances, their eyes lingering on the hunter with a new respect born not from words, but from the actions he had taken. He had stood steadfast, calm amid storms both literal and metaphorical, proving a strength that transcended bloodlines and old grievances. The woman, once isolated by fear and silence, now found herself part of a circle forged by shared survival. The hunter broke the silence, his voice steady and sincere. I do not claim to understand all your ways, but I honor your family and your courage. I stand not to take, but to protect. His words were met with nods, some slow and tentative, others firm and resolute. The woman reached out, her hand brushing the hunter's with quiet certainty. The touch was small but powerful, a signal that trust was no longer fragile but growing. The brothers observed, their expressions shifting between skepticism and reluctant acceptance. One of the elder brothers spoke softly the weight of tradition mingling with a newfound hope. Perhaps strength is not only in blood, but in the choices we make. We see this in you. The words hung in the cool air, a bridge between old and new. The prairie breeze carried the firelight's warmth, wrapping around them like a silent blessing. The unlikely bond formed not in grand gestures, but in moments of honesty, respect, and the courage to face uncertain futures together. As night deepened, the hunter, the woman, and her brothers sat side by side, not as enemies, but as allies in a story still unfolding beneath the vast, watchful sky. Under the vast expanse of stars, the brothers gathered close, their faces illuminated by flickering firelight. The elder among them began to speak, his voice rich with the weight of generations. "Our people live by a code," he said, eyes steady and unwavering. "A code of honor, respect, and duty. It binds us to the land, to each other, and to the spirits that guide our way." The hunter listened intently, the meaning behind the words settling deep within him. This was not just law. It was a sacred trust, a way of life forged through hardship and survival. The code demanded courage, loyalty, and above all, integrity. It was a measure not only of strength, but of character. The elder continued, his gaze shifting between the hunter and his sister. To protect is to honor. To stand for what is right, even when the path is hard, is the highest form of respect. The words carried weight, a recognition of the hunter's actions in saving the woman from harm. One brother nodded solemnly. "You have shown that you understand what it means to walk this path, not by blood but by deed." The others murmured their agreement, the firelight dancing in their eyes like a promise. The woman watched quietly, the bonds of family and tradition weaving around her like the woven patterns of a sacred cloth. Her choice to trust the hunter was no longer a rebellion, but an extension of the honor they all sought to uphold. The hunter spoke then, voice low but firm. "I accept this code. I will carry it with me as a shield and a guide, not to claim what is not mine, but to stand beside those who choose their own path." A hush fell over the group, the weight of their shared understanding settling between them like the night itself. The prairie whispered softly beyond the fire's glow, a timeless witness to the hunter's code and the honor that bound them all. In that moment, beneath the endless sky, the fragile threads of respect and loyalty tightened, forming a foundation strong enough to face whatever trials lay ahead. The campfire flickered against the darkening sky, its warm glow casting shifting shadows across the faces gathered around it. Though moments ago there was quiet understanding, now a tense undercurrent pulsed beneath the surface. Eyes darted nervously, voices lowered to uneasy murmurs, and the air grew thick with questions left unspoken. One of the younger brothers broke the silence, his tone sharp and uncertain. "How can we be sure he will honor our ways, that he won't bring dishonor upon our family?" His words stirred a ripple of agreement and murmurs of doubt. The hunter met the gaze steadily, his calm presence a contrast to the rising unease. The woman's expression hardened, her jaw tight. "You question his honor, yet forget the courage it took to save me. The choice I made was not yours to decide." Her voice was steady, but carried the weight of years spent fighting for autonomy. Some brothers shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty and the unfamiliar. Another brother's voice rose, louder this time. "Our laws are not to be bent for convenience. Blood binds us, not words. What if this path leads us to ruin?" The fire's light flickered wildly, as if responding to the storm gathering among them. The hunter spoke, measured but firm. "I have no claim to your blood or your ways, but I offer respect, and I stand willing to prove myself by your code." His words sought to bridge the divide, but the tension lingered, palpable as the night chill. The woman reached out, her hand resting briefly on the hunter's arm, a quiet gesture of solidarity amid the discord. The brothers exchanged glances, the fragile peace teetering on the edge of fracture. As the fire crackled, the weight of tradition and the desire for change collided, setting the stage for a reckoning that would test loyalties, challenge beliefs, and demand the kind of courage that could either heal or break the bonds of family forever. The morning air was crisp, the prairie stretching wide and open under a pale sky. The hunter stood at the edge of a clearing, bow in hand, muscles coiled with quiet strength. Before him, the brothers watched intently, their expressions a mix of skepticism and cautious hope. The test was not just of skill, but of character, a challenge to prove that honor could be earned beyond bloodlines. The eldest brother stepped forward, handing the hunter a knife with worn but sharp edges. "This is your tool," he said. "You will track and hunt a stag alone. Show us your patience, your respect for the land, and your courage in the face of the unknown." The hunter nodded, feeling the weight of their expectations settle on his shoulders. With a steady breath, he moved into the tall grass, eyes scanning for signs: the broken twig, the disturbed earth, the faint scent carried on the wind. Each step was deliberate, silent, blending with the rhythms of the wild. Behind him, the brothers and the woman waited, the tension thick as the minutes stretched. The prairie held its breath, watching the man prove himself in the ancient dance of hunter and hunted. Hours passed. The hunter's focus never wavered as he stalked through brush and shadow, honoring the code of patience and respect. When at last he raised his bow and released the arrow, it flew true, striking the stag just behind the shoulder, a clean, humane kill. He approached the fallen animal reverently, whispering thanks to the spirit of the land. The brothers nodded in approval, the sharp lines of doubt softening with respect. The woman's eyes shone with quiet pride. Returning to camp, the hunter carried the stag with steady hands, a symbol not only of his skill, but of his willingness to walk their path with honor. The test had been harsh, but it had forged a connection, a bond sealed not by blood, but by courage, respect, and the shared language of survival. Under the endless sky, the prairie whispered once more, acknowledging a new chapter written in the code of hunters and the courage to belong. The firelight flickered softly as the night deepened, casting warm shadows across the faces gathered in quiet reflection. The woman sat apart, her gaze fixed beyond the flames toward the endless prairie stretching into darkness. The weight of choice pressed heavy on her shoulders, between the familiar bonds of tradition and the uncertain promise of freedom. Her brothers watched her closely, their expressions a mixture of pride, concern, and unresolved tension. They understood the gravity of what she faced. To choose tradition was to honor family, heritage, and the unbroken chain of ancestors who had walked this land before. It was a path that demanded conformity and sacrifice. The hunter remained near, silent but steady, a presence she had come to rely on in ways she hadn't anticipated. His quiet respect had offered her space to breathe, to find strength beyond fear. But the choice was hers alone, and she carried it with fierce determination. She finally spoke, voice low but clear. "I have lived by the rules set before me, but they nearly broke me. I did not run to escape my people. I ran to escape a life where I had no say." Her words rippled through the circle like a whispered wind, stirring thoughts and feelings long held in silence. One brother's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Another nodded slowly, a reluctant acceptance in his eyes. The woman continued, "I choose freedom, not to abandon my people, but to claim my life on my own terms. If that means breaking tradition, then so be it." The fire crackled, the prairie night holding its breath as the brothers and hunter absorbed her declaration. It was not rebellion. It was a claim to self, a refusal to be defined solely by the past. In that moment, beneath the vast sky, the fragile bonds of family and the fierce desire for freedom found a fragile balance. The woman's choice was clear, and with it came a new path. One walked not alone, but with those who had earned her trust and respect. The morning sun cast a muted glow over the prairie as the brothers gathered quietly around the fading embers of the campfire. The night's fierce emotions had softened into a contemplative stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the grass. Their faces, once hardened by anger and suspicion, now held the lines of reluctant respect. One brother broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "She has spoken with the courage of a warrior," he said, glancing toward his sister. "And he has proven himself by the code we hold sacred." His words were met with nods from the others, small acknowledgments that the bond forged through trial and truth could not be easily undone. The woman watched them closely, sensing the shift but still guarded. The path she chose was not without consequence, and the acceptance she sought was fragile, earned only through endurance and honesty. The hunter stood beside her, a quiet pillar of strength amid the uncertain balance. Another brother stepped forward, his tone tinged with both caution and admiration. "We may not fully understand his ways, but his actions speak louder than any doubt." He looked directly at the hunter. "You have earned a place among us, not by blood, but by honor." The words settled over the group like a healing balm, easing the tension but not erasing the complexity of what lay ahead. Respect had been granted, but it was tethered to the unspoken promise that trust must be nurtured and guarded. The woman's eyes softened, a flicker of hope shining through the weariness. She reached out, her hand finding her brother's in a gesture of reconciliation. The brothers returned the gesture with slow but genuine acceptance, a quiet vow to protect what was now theirs in a new way. As the prairie breeze carried the scents of earth and fire, the brothers, the woman, and the hunter stood united by respect earned through courage, a fragile but unbreakable bond that would guide them through the days to come. The sun beat down on the clearing where the hunter and the brothers stood facing each other, the tension thick in the dry air. Around them, the land stretched wide, endless grass, rugged hills, and the open sky, a testament to the lives shaped by hardship and loyalty. Today was not just a test of skill or words, but of deeper meaning, a pact to bind what had been broken and forge a future together. The eldest brother took a ceremonial knife from his belt, its blade etched with ancient symbols worn smooth by generations. He held it steady as the hunter stepped forward, meeting the gaze of each man who stood as witness. With solemn hands, the hunter extended his palm, open and willing. The brother's knife sliced a thin line across his own palm, a quiet but deliberate ritual. Blood welled and dripped, mingling with the dust beneath their feet. One by one, the brothers followed, each marking themselves with the sacred blood that bound family and tribe. The hunter pressed his palm against the eldest brother's, the warmth of shared blood sealing an unspoken promise. Honor, protection, and trust offered freely and accepted without question. The woman watched with quiet reverence, the weight of the moment settling over her like a mantle. "This pact is not just between men," the eldest brother said, voice deep and steady. "It is between all who stand here, bound by respect and the courage to choose a new path." His eyes lingered on the hunter and the woman, acknowledging their journey and the strength it had taken. The prairie breeze stirred, carrying the scent of earth and sweat, fire and life. The pact was more than tradition. It was a renewal, a commitment to walk forward together, honoring the past while embracing change. As the sun dipped lower, shadows lengthened, and the bonds forged in blood and trust held firm beneath the endless sky, a promise that no matter the trials ahead, they would face them united. The fragile peace forged by blood and trust was tested sooner than any had expected. News had come riding across the prairie, whispers of a threat looming beyond the boundaries of their tribe, a danger born not of tradition, but of outsiders seeking to claim the land and its people. The hunter, the woman, and her brothers gathered beneath the wide sky, their faces hardened by the weight of the unknown. The woman's eyes burned with fierce determination. "We cannot ignore what comes from beyond," she said, voice steady despite the tension thickening the air. "Our bonds are strong, but the world outside does not honor the codes we live by. We must be ready." The eldest brother nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "Our tribe has faced many storms, but this is different. These enemies do not fight by our rules. We will need all our courage, all our strength." The hunter stepped forward, shoulders squared and eyes sharp. "I will stand with you," he said simply. "Not as one of your blood, but as one who has earned your trust. Together, we face this danger, not as separate parts, but as one." Plans were made beneath the fading light. Strategies whispered against the backdrop of rustling grass and distant coyote calls. The prairie seemed to hold its breath, the calm before a storm that could reshape everything they had fought to protect. As night fell, the camp was alive with quiet preparation. Weapons were checked, arrows sharpened, and watches set beneath the stars. The woman moved among her brothers and the hunter, her presence a steady flame in the uncertain dark. They knew the path ahead would be perilous, crossing lines that could shatter fragile alliances. Yet, bound by honor and the bonds of their newfound pact, they faced the looming threat with unwavering resolve. The prairie whispered warnings on the wind, but beneath the vast, watchful sky, a united force stood ready, guardians not only of tradition, but of the freedom they had chosen to claim together. The dawn broke with a cold, steel-gray light, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain where the threat had gathered. The hunter stood at the forefront, bow drawn and eyes sharp, muscles coiled with quiet intensity. Around him, the brothers and the woman moved with practiced precision, ready to defend their land and each other against the encroaching danger. The enemy forces emerged like a dark tide, rough men armed with rifles and harsh intent on claiming what was not theirs.